Welcome, everyone, to Press Coverage, part of Going for Two Live. My name is Kyle Sedner, and as always, I'm your host. And as always, joined by a great guest. For this week's episode, it's Tan Ho, a fellow Canadian, so I'm always interested to to bring that element to it. But Tan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, and great place to talk fantasy football, but and a little more, of course. And it's all about getting to know people, doing some great things, great content creation out in the space. So why don't you, before we get into the more we'll say more personal questions, why don't you let people know what you do in the fantasy football space and in the Twitter community?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. I started dynastyprocess.com in 2019, I guess. And honestly, as part of my work in that space, in the fantasy football space, I consider myself kind of a data developer. So kind of both like the back end engineering of data, um, accessing fantasy football APIs, accessing platforms. That's sort of one of my main like specialties. So you might know me as the developer of FF Scraper if you use R packages at all. I'm kind of one of the leading developers for that. Actually, I'm the developer of that. And it's one of the it accesses all the platforms like MFL, Sleeper, Flea Flicker, ESPN. It kind of gets you that data. I am also the developer of a trade calculator and some open set of trade value apps, as well as some other data tools, essentially. So kind of the back end and the front end of data tooling in the fantasy football space. I also work with DLF on their trade analyzer. We also recently just put out a tight end premium tool. So if you haven't checked that out, please give that a spin. And honestly, I also that's a pretty good summary. I like to sit in a few discords and dispense opinions on Twitter, but who doesn't? And let's see. What else can you tell about? I have a live Twitch stream on Saturdays and Sundays. It's more about programming than it is about fantasy, but it is. I do work on fantasy tools for Dynasty Process and otherwise there. So you can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/tanho underscore. It's kind of the reverse of my Twitter handle underscore tanho. But you can catch me there. And yeah, that's a pretty good rundown of what I do in the community. I'm kind of like that, like data niche, more so than anything else.
But still providing information, providing resources for people, and then it's important. Uh, and again, one of the things that I kind of prioritize with some of the guests on the show, especially, is people who would engage in the community. And you and I have played in a couple leagues together, a couple big leagues, Scott Fish Bowl, which is in terms of just size of number of people, one of the largest leagues in the same division. Of all the 1,000 people, you and I get put in the same 12-team division. Assassin's Creed character was the division.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a big video game guy.
Assassin's Creed, I definitely played a ton of when I was a kid, and it's definitely my first choice, I think, that year,
Oh, okay.
as far as video game division. So that was pretty cool. I definitely remember your team turned out pretty well in that league, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So
Winning, it's funny. Canada Cup last year is the same story. Winning record, but just missed out the playoffs. One spot away, in the conference, within 100 points away of in the Scott Fish getting the playoffs. So good teams, but not good enough. But the experience was great, and I played a little Assassin's Creed, mostly Black Flag. And honestly, my favorite part was the ship fighting, throwing cannonballs at other ships.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ezio and like all of like the other like the cool Italian history kind of stuff, it was cool, but it honestly it's like surprising how much I enjoyed the pirate aspect of the Black Flag game, and I still have my avatar. I still have the avatar kicking around somewhere, I'm pretty sure. But basically, the Ezio, the pirate game was definitely my favorite of all of the Assassin's Creed as well. So, yeah,
The sea shanties were just enough. That's such a great soundtrack.
the best. Literally, just drive. Just I say drive, but you just sail around in this boat in your ship. You just shoot things, but you just enjoy the music, kind of the vibe, like seeing things. Blah blah. It's a lot of fun. So I really enjoyed that for sure.
Yeah, Gerson's here. A big yo. And Thanks a lot, Gerson, for tuning in. I know for anyone who watched during draft, Gerson was part of quite a lot of draft coverage here at Going for Two. I know Dan the B League, dropped the mic. We were on for a few hours, 3 or 4 hours on Saturday, so that was definitely fun. So good time there. Check it out. There's lots going on with Going for Two. So many shows every week. I know every Monday, alternating between this press coverage and Gladys Louise Tyler's 2 point conversion. But all of us are brought to you by Manscaped. So definitely recommend everyone check that out. Also, if you do get any Manscaped products, be sure to use the promo code PRESS. You get 20% off and free shipping. Touch on a few Manscaped things later, but just wanted to quickly point that out before we get too far in. But let's turn back the clocks. I'll say it slowly and get it in properly. But go back to how you first were interested by football. So I know up in Canada, maybe the trajectory of the story will be a little different. So curious to how football started with you.
Yeah. I mean, so I first started watching football, like really being aware of sports and being aware of football in like 2004. And so, like you as a Canadian, I didn't really have a team. So 2004 also happens to be the year where it was really extremely easy to get sucked into like the sheer awesomeness of Ben Roethlisberger's 15-1 rookie season, and he also went like AFC like championships that year. So it's super cool. Like it definitely jumped on that bandwagon that year, and I haven't left it. I still consider myself a Steelers fan, especially as like over the course of Ben's kind of career, and his career is coming to an end now. In hindsight, in hindsight, he's a little bit less of a palatable character as you learn more about him as a person. But oh my goodness, like Ben was the superhero escape artist before the likes of, Aaron Rodgers. You hear about extending the play, but Ben Roethlisberger was that before that. Like you hear about Russ, Kyler, those guys running around now and like always being able to make a play. That was Ben Roethlisberger. He's the superhero, the escape artist. You could never count out the Steelers when he's in the game. He'll play hurt. He was huge. He was untackleable. It's crazy, right? And it's a huge portion of the Steelers' relevance today, even like like them being relevant for like 15, nearly 20 years is a large part because of Ben Roethlisberger. And like him or hate him as a person, all the off-field scandals and what have you, you have to admit that he's a really good quarterback. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day, and that's definitely kind of like the kind of that memory of like reading the newspaper, because I wasn't really watching TV at the time, and like watching this guy and reading all the stories about like somebody who's like that good when I first started, right? Like like just the rookie kind of underdog takes over, steals a show. Can he continue this 15-1 season? It's crazy. And definitely kind of one of the reasons why I'm still a Steelers fan today. If it had been like the year after that or the year before that, I might not be a Steelers fan. But as of now, still a Steelers fan, kind of growing out of it a little. But definitely kind of as I kind of switch, as Ben's career is kind of over. I'm starting to disagree with a lot more of the decisions the Steelers are making. Definitely starting to follow analytics, especially as I start teaching myself analytics and football analytics. I'm kind of becoming more of a student of the game, of the process, and less so of the Steelers specifically. But it's still a really fond memory early on, like becoming a Steelers fan and then kind of growing with that fandom over time.
Now you said sports, so I'm guessing football's not the only sport you watch then or follow.
It was the one that it was the most exciting one. It's actually my number one sport. I would consider it. The Sens at the time, comparatively, were really bad. Like to the point where I would talk about my hockey fandom in terms of Toronto, in which it's any team except the Leafs. I will cheer for any hockey team except the Maple Leafs. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Whatever. They're doing really well now. Like they're turning it around, but it's kind of been a love-hate relationship with hockey because Eugene Melnyk has ruined that team, and then kind of it's succeeded immensely in spite of bad ownership. It's kind of like the opposite of the Steelers in that sense. The Roonies are like fantastic. They're the most stable organization in all of sports, and Eugene's stable in the like it's perpetually shitty. Um, so in that sense, I haven't really enjoyed it as much. I also follow soccer. I'm a Liverpool fan. So kind of like in that same days and age, Steven Gerrard went to the Champions League and won the Champions League in that year in 2004. So kind of just starting to pick out my sports heroes as a 10-year-old in that age, at that age, and kind of like starting and trying to keep those teams as I go through. Obviously, you know, you can try to accuse me of being a homer, like a bandwagon fan now that the Liverpool has become good, but they've kind of gone down again a little bit with some injuries this past year. So that's I consider soccer my second sport, hockey third, basketball. You know, I cheer for the Raptors when they're in the playoffs, but aside from that, I'm not really paying attention. And I can't stand baseball. I'm sorry. I don't have the patience for it.
I agree on the baseball front. So you like football? Do you watch much CFL?
A bit. I know the Red Blacks kind of came up with the team, but they again kind of in that formative phase. It's like, okay, so all the good players get stolen by the NFL. So I might as well just watch the good sport, you know? As much as like that's gonna offend a bunch of CFL fans around here. I'm not from Winnipeg, for example. Winnipeg, I can understand the sport tradition there. The Ottawa hasn't really had a sports team, and then the Red Blacks kind of came back while I was away at university, and so it's like it's less of a thing. I don't have as much ownership with that. So you know, aside from like I know Johnny Manziel did a thing. I'm always rooting for Canadian football players. You can ask anybody about my favorite football rookies this year. But aside from that, it's kind of like I'm not really paying attention to CFL, the league, because I don't think it's as worthwhile time wise. You know, as soon as they get anywhere good, they're going to the NFL, or you know, we're looking at players who weren't as good before, basically. So, in that sense, I follow a lot of Canadian football players. I don't really follow the CFL. I'm aware of it. I played high school football up until grade 12, but obviously, when you're 5'7", you're not going anywhere. You're not going into the university level very quickly. So, you know, it comes with the territory.
I'm trying to think. You're talking 2004, especially those years with the Steelers. Because the Ottawa Red Blacks have returned. They've been under several forms. They were the Ottawa Renegades. Were they around in 2004? That was just ending the tenure, maybe.
I think that was just the end of the tenure. They were there. They were about to fold again. I think like it was not a great space for CFL. As soon as like I remember like a few players' names at that point. I wasn't really following the names. They didn't get as much publicity as like NFL at that point. And then like a little while after that, I was like, you know, the team folded. So like all those players kind of disappeared. And as soon as that happened, I lost like all interest in the CFL. You know, I had a high school coach who won a CFL championship with the Argonauts, and then like ended up coaching our team, and he was great and all that. But like as much as he tried, I never really could like engage and enjoy CFL. Especially when compared to the massively over media produced NFL, right? Like there's so much more going on. It's so much more viewer friendly. There's less kicking. Like you don't think 3 downs is a thing until you're punting every third down, which means you're punting like 50% more often, right? Like it's crazy. You don't think about that, but you're punting like so much more frequently because you only get 2 chances instead of 3 to advance a down, right? So it's kind of crazy in that sense. But yeah.
And I know, you know, we're of course going everything from a fantasy perspective, and I'm curious to your origins of that in a sec. But you know, with CFL, not a lot of CFL players are going from the CFL to the NFL very regularly. I know there've been a couple of receivers over the last couple of years. Duke Williams, he might be one of the most productive of the last couple seasons because we've had Brandon Zylstra. I know the Packers had Reggie Bangleton last year. Zylstra's with the Vikings. You know, he grew up in Minnesota, so there's ties there, and they've done very little. So it's tough. I mean, probably the most productive one is Olivier Vernon, who did pretty well with the Lions, entered the NFL, regular starter, but obviously unless you play IDP, not a fantasy relevant position. So it's tough. So from a fantasy perspective, there's not much. It's not like a feeder league or anything. Like you're not like you said. It's a total separate league. You're not necessarily the research you're doing already for fantasy isn't you have to do extra for CFL. I know I do CFL DFS.
Okay.
When it's obviously that didn't happen last year. I
Yeah, but
find I
it's
win
hard.
more than NFL DFS. I think it's just simply less players, so I think it easier. Not that I win that much. Gerson, for
There's fewer
instance.
sharps. Yeah, there's definitely fewer sharps kind of watching and like really paying attention to CFL compared to the NFL. It's like it's the same thing as far as the following the money, right? So I totally get that.
But
It
I
can be a
also
little more
do
profitable.
watch a lot of CFL, so I kind of get that like edge a bit in that I'm probably watching almost every game. Like some weeks I will watch all 4 games, which lets you know everything. I know Gerson, he's a good DFS source in season, but he says baseball is boring, much better in person. Talking about Canadian rookies, so Sean mentioned Palmer. I think that was one Josh Palmer. Uh, was Josh Palmer someone you were higher? I know for most of the community, him going in the third round was a surprise. Was that someone you were high on, or were you just as shocked as the rest of us to see him go in the third?
So I have an obligation, I find, as a Canadian fantasy analyst, to always stand every Canadian no matter what. So I was informed of being a Josh Palmer fan. That I'll put it exactly that way. Someone told me that I was now a Josh Palmer fan in February, and definitely started keeping an eye on him. Right, like you keep an eye on Chuba Hubbard. Everybody knows about Chuba Hubbard. Not as many people knew about Josh Palmer. And then when I found out about him in February, I'm starting to pay attention. Right, and like before the draft, I was definitely surprised that he was like 70, like he was in the top 75 for PFF's like overall players, like on the big board. So like PFF really likes him, and then I'm like, okay, so let's check out the analytics. And there, like, there's a guy on Discord I'm back and forth with, but like he's like, Palmer has never had a season above 500 yards. So like, how is it possible that he's going to be a good player? Doesn't matter. He's Canadian. I'm going to be with it. I don't care if it's against the analytics. And this, honestly, it's very reminiscent about how I felt about Claypool last year. Doesn't matter. I want to stand him. I don't care. His athletics test out great. I want to cheer for that. His numbers are crap. Doesn't matter. Whatever. And then the massive amount of fortuitousness that Claypool ended up on the Steelers in the second round. So, like, second round, Canadian, big and fast, and on my Steelers, all with it. And honestly, it didn't bite me. Like, I bought a few meme shares and like it didn't bite me. And so this year I'm like more open to this idea of Josh Palmer. And then all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, day 2 capital to the Chargers with Justin Herbert and Mike Williams is a free agent next year. All in. And like it's one of those jokes where like you're like, okay, so it's a meme topic where like, yeah, I like Josh Palmer. It's kind of a joke. Like, I'm a Canadian. I have to cheer all the Canadians. And then all of a sudden it's like, it's not a joke anymore. Like, I'm literally like hammering Josh Palmer, like right around the like Diami Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, like all of those guys. None of them have good quarterbacks. Josh Palmer has a good quarterback. He has a path to being receiver 2 next year. He's receiver 3 this year. He has a path to receiver 3 this year and receiver 2 next year with a good quarterback. I'm 100% on board with Josh Palmer right now. Like, I don't care. I don't care about the analytics. He's Canadian. He's got like top 70. Like, he beat like Patrick Surtain and JC Horn and a whole bunch of really good competition in college. He's not a slouch on film. Draft capital, good. Like I'm 100% on board with Josh Palmer. I don't care about any of the analytics naysayers. The new system, are they Canadian? Do they will they be day 2 capital? I'm on board. Doesn't matter. I'm with it. Let's do it.
Yeah, it seems like in rookie drafts, at least what I've been in, third round mostly. Are you considering him in your boards in the second round, or you still thinking more early third, just maybe a little earlier than most people in the third? Because I'm actually seeing him go in the fourth in some cases.
Yeah, I will. I have taken him at 207 in a 1 quarterback league, and that's after Tony, Diami, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Amari Rogers had all gone off the board at that point. A few quarterbacks hadn't gone, but I picked him ahead of Pat Fryermuth in that case, Fields, Lance, etc. I didn't need a quarterback at that time, and I didn't have a 3rd round pick to like kind of gamble that he would be there. So all aboard. I'm probably the highest on record for Josh Palmer at this point. I'd love to see him go higher and higher and higher, obviously, but I have him there. I honestly like did rookie tiers on stream, and like I'll take him like right next to like Tony and Diemi and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like they're very similar, but he's with the best quarterback of the lot. So it's like the most stable offensive situation, right? So like there's arguments, there's draft capital. I'm with it.
Yeah, I think it's a big tier of wide receiver, and pick within your tier there. So it seems like if you're that convicted, needing to take him at the end of the second round to ensure you get him might be the case, because I'm seeing instances at least 303 I'm seeing. So if you are sitting at the end of the second thinking, is my late third going to get him? It might not if you really again be convicted in that wide receiver tier, because that's it's a pretty big tier.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, you just really got to take your guys, right? Like in this class where everyone's kind of muddied together, if there's a benefit for you taking somebody, like you have like some investment in taking somebody, or you think that they're going to be good, go and get them. Like, yeah, it's very possible you'll get like it's more likely you'll get Palmer in the fourth than someone will take him in the second, right? Like that's very much the balance probabilities. I have both meme reasons and like legitimate valid reasons that I think Palmer's better than Schwartz, Eskridge, Atwell, even, right? Like there's reasons for that, primarily because I think the Chargers are going to be a good offense. So in that sense, I'm more than willing to pay the slight premium, or really just not take the trade down and gamble that he's going to be gone. So in that sense, I'm all for it as far as taking your guys in this tier. If you have any sort of process or preference at this point, just take them, honestly, because this year they could go anywhere.
All right, talking about preference and process, let's peel back, and you talked about how you got into sports, but how did you get into the fantasy side?
Yeah, like most people, I think everyone kind of gets into fantasy in like high school. I'm not as aware of people who don't. So kind of like I started picking up football and watching it and playing Madden and stuff in 2004, and like kind of as I got a little older, and then kind of like picked up my first high school league in like 2009, 2010, something like that. On NFL.com, which to this day is still probably the worst of all the fantasy platforms. I still like my high school league is still there. If you guys are watching this, like, can we please move it somewhere freaking else? Honestly, I hate that site so much. It's ridiculous.
My first league is also still on NFL.com, so yeah, I get the feeling. It's the only league I have on there, that's a nice thing. I'm okay. At least I'm not adding leagues on there. I wouldn't want to do that.
No, and I'm very picky and choosy now, but like, your high school league is your high school league, right? And like, as much as I'd love it to move to like a sleeper with the rest of my dynasty leagues or whatever, it's hard, like tradition is at this point, 11 years, 12 years later down the line, it's like, it is what it is, like it's not changing. You're not getting them to add PPR no matter how much you beg, or another flex, or like heaven forbid a super flex, right? Like that's not happening. And obviously, like I'm peripherally in the fantasy football biz now, but not all of my friends were that obsessed, right? Like when you pick your high school friends, they're not all going to be this obsessed with fantasy football, right? So, it's not likely that they're going to see any benefit from PPR. Like, oh my God, the receivers are going to go crazy. I'm like, well, no, they don't, but whatever. Those things don't really matter. So it's kind of the like connecting to your friends and like, keeping those connections alive that really matter there. But yeah, in 2010, about the only thing I remember, honestly, and like, my school kids were commissioning the league at the time. And one of my only memories of like the early high school period, like obviously stuff has happened later, but like one of the periods was like I was on at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, one time, like middle of the season, something like that. And I guess Mark Clayton had just gone off for like 150 yards that week. Mark Clayton used to be on the Bears and then the Ravens or something like that. And he had gone off, and the commissioner turned off waivers to make it first come, first serve additions. And remember, this is like our first or second year in this league in high school. And he turned off waivers that week just so he could add Mark Clayton on the sly. And of course, we blasted him for it, right? But I was also online at the time, saw the ad go, like the ad drop, the waiver went through. I'm like, okay, well, if he's going to do it, I'm going to pick up a guy off the waiver wire. That guy, Michael Vick, kid you not, 7 touchdowns that week, the week I picked him up. He like 4 by pass, like he threw 80 yards down the field to Deshaun Jackson on the first play of the game, and then like it was like a 7 touchdown game, and I was like, rubbed it in the commissioner's face so freaking hard that he broke the rules. I took advantage and got Michael Vick and won the championship that year. Like, you know, like how is that even possible? No idea. Anyways, high school shenanigans.
Cosmic justice. That's
that is justice for you.
Yeah. So, so when did it go from being, just playing fantasy football to really trying to, help others with the content creation and specifically, I guess your journey into we'll say I'm trying to think of a pirate joke with R. I can't right now. So
the Black Flag.
Yeah. I just walked the plank there. I'm diving through with my metaphors right now. So go ahead, you take over.
Yeah. Honestly, like I did pick up I played fantasy football, and like obviously like you kind of go through phases, and at one point I'd been like doing like 10, like I went through like a summer where I was working some boring office job, and so I did like 10 auction, like ESPN redraft auctions leagues that year and whatever, and kind of like continued like just doing some ridiculous stuff. And obviously you start like planning when you, especially in an auction, you kind of start planning stuff. But it wasn't really until like I picked up Dynasty in 2016, 2017, where I was like, okay, so I need to actually like keep track of these guys and make an Excel sheet to like track them. And of course there was a Dynasty trade calculator tool at that time. It's now defunct. Nick folded it, but it was a site called Dynasty FF Tools, and they had trade calculator values. And I was like, okay, well, this calculator is cool, but I really want a league analyzer. Like, what is the sum total of all my players on this team based on these trade values, and how can I make trades to like where I have a strong group of receivers and they have a strong group of running backs? How can we make like trades? How can I identify the teams that are weak without like visually identifying them, and kind of like literally like copied and pasted the Excel sheet, put it in there, and then like wrote like a whole bunch of like Excel formulas to like join stuff together. And that really started it, because as soon as I got somewhere that I was like decently proud of it, I was like, hey, Reddit, look at my stuff. Right, and like put it on Dynasty Reddit, had a picture, and you'll probably find it on my profile if you manage to find it. But basically, it was like, hey Reddit, I made an Excel sheet, and it's got like color coded conditional formatting, right? Conditional formatting to like pick out like, this is the strongest team, this is your weakest team, this is their call heat map at each position. You can make trades to like balance out your like team positional strengths, and like I made this. I was like, with no intention of being a service and content creator and provider, I put it on Reddit, like, okay, here you go. And like, I'm cool. I made this thing. And then, and like, it's whatever. And then like instantly it's like 5 DMs in my inbox. Can you make me a sheet like that? I'd love to have that. Can you like start doing this? And I'm like, okay, like, yeah, no problem. There's only 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. It's like, okay, I'll just give me your league ID. I'll copy your team in and put it in and whatever, right? And then all of a sudden I'm realizing like a lot of people actually kind of want this kind of thing, where it's like they want me to build a tool for them that like tracks their league. And so it kind of started this process where it's like, okay, well, I don't want a job to do this thing, to like copy and paste values out of Dynasty FF Tools, copy and paste their rosters and join it together and like print out this thing. Like, okay, so how do I like automate parts of it? And then as soon as you start asking, how do I automate parts of the spreadsheet? That's when you start like this like programmer like slippery slope into like, okay, now you're like thinking about things like, okay, so how do I connect to Dynasty FF Tools and scrape it? How do I connect to the league and scrape that page? And you start scraping everything. At that point, I didn't know anything about APIs. But basically, just kind of like that slippery slope into like, okay, so I'm building tools for people, and you kind of get that validation, like this is useful for people, like lots of people are using it. And the reason I knew people were using it because they asked me about why it didn't work this way, or like I downloaded this, but I ran into a bug. And so solving bugs is basically validation that someone's actually using your stuff. But basically, kind of worked with them kind of solving, like continuing to improve my programming as they found bugs in what I was doing. It's like, okay, it didn't work this way. Why didn't this work? Whatever, right? And so like every Excel analyst kind of in fantasy football and all of their data analysts always start with Excel. It never starts with R. It never starts with like being a data scientist that happens to pick up fantasy football. Never. Nobody in fantasy football analytics started as a programmer. They start as an Excel sheet, like with Excel sheets, and like asking questions, answering questions, and like improving on that. um, from the Excel sheets, I kind of learned Power Query, which is a Excel tool, like a visual based database kind of tool. Like it gets you to think about your data sheets in database format. And then from there, decided with helps friends to push it into like a web app on Shiny. Well, someone actually offered to make it for me and said, okay, yeah, I'll let you do it. And then like didn't like the way they did that, or like liked it, but like wanted to fix certain bits of it. And then eventually it was like, okay, so in order to fix this, you need to know this, and kind of work my way into programming, into R, into data analysis. And today, you know, I was in real estate at the time, and today I'm a data developer for a company. So it's kind of one of these like crazy snowball effects where you didn't know what you were getting into, but it is life changing.
Yeah.
Fantasy football and analysis and otherwise.
Yeah, I was going to use the word life changing because it, totally shaped your career. So that's good job, fantasy football.
Right? And I had no idea that was happening. And, you know, I honestly just like I made this cool thing, and then it kind of snowballed from there. So that's definitely the story. I don't think it's going to be everybody's story. I don't think it's everybody's path to it, but it's definitely mine. And it kind of it's just kind of it's one of those life is what's happening when you don't really realize what's happening. But yeah, it's been fantastic. Like immensely grateful for fantasy football and analytics.
And everyone's got their own unique journey to get to that place.
Yeah.
But we all, all of us could use help along the way. So, what's one piece of advice that you would give to anyone who is trying to start off in fantasy football content creation or any form of content creation?
Yeah. In terms of not following my path, and like, you know, I just outlined sort of my path into it. But the book, like what I would recommend, honestly, is there's a book series and there's a set of books out there called Steal Like an Artist and Show Your Work. I actually have it here. Hang on. So this series by Austin Kleon, I highly recommend, just in terms of it's small, right? Like it's like, you know, 100 pages or whatever, and like small font. But I highly recommend it just in terms of being like becoming a content creator, like coming up with ideas, generating things. There's a few advice tidbits. It's organized as like a set of checklists and like a few like supporting points to that idea. But some of the things that have kind of stuck with me are thinking process and not product. Obviously, dynasty process kind of comes from that idea. Not waiting till you know who you are to get started. So just start doing something you think solves that problem, and kind of adapt as time goes on, right? Like don't stick with being just one thing in the community. Writing the book, being the person you want to read, and then keeping your day job is another, like, just 4 bits of advice in terms of things. You know, your day, like your hobbies will grow as you learn, as you contribute, as you do more. But really, like keeping your day job and keeping your hobbies separate has kind of been really useful for me. As pieces of advice in terms of just starting out as a content creator. You know, your day job helps fund that. It's comfortable. You know, it doesn't have to. You don't have to make this your career. There's a lot of people I think make the quote unquote mistake of trying to be a full time fantasy analyst and really chasing it. And I think when you kind of force it like that, you stop enjoying it and you stop growing and you stop learning. When you become a full time fantasy person. So those are the things that have helped me for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe that glorious idea of yeah, just fantasy all time. That's all I have to do. for all my life. I think I think we all want that, at a certain point. But like you're saying, the journey that to get there, don't force feed it, don't rush it. Let that be natural, and if it's right, it's right. But maybe that's a good also kind of reality check on some people as well to kind of hear that. So, not that I'm talking to myself right now or anything.
And definitely, I'm not very like familiar with your work and all that. I'm not saying like you should take that advice. I'm just saying like as in general to like past me and people considering being like just starting out. I think that's, I think it's important advice to just kind of keep as a reality check of like making it big isn't what you think it is, and so just keep your day job, learn more, grow more, have fun, right? So those are kinds of like the reasons why I think that.
Yeah, for sure. So, one thing actually you transitioned to, I transitioned away, so that's a bad host of me. But you're talking about, well, or I guess not really. We're still on this topic. So the idea of, career and hobbies, and jobs and hobbies. So, we've talked a lot about some hobbies already: sports, fantasy, now coding and programming. But what are do you have any other hobbies, and what other interests do you have?
Yeah, I favorite hobbies. Um, I am a rower with the Ottawa Rowing Club, and I'm also a rowing coach there. I picked that up pretty recently, but it's been a nice kind of like it's a definite change in like pace from football and rowing. It's more of like a long, steady kind of meditative thing. Obviously, it can also be very competitive. It can be very like macho, like put a lot of energy into it. But that's definitely one of my favorite physical activities. I'm obviously also a programmer, so I like R programming, data analysis, data science, but also like helping people with that. I'm active on the R4DS Slack community and like helping people out there. I'm also a participant with the help. Like I help out on the NFL versus NFL Fast Star Discord as well. So in general, I like helping people with R, kind of making that path easier for them after spending a lot of time head bashing problems in our other favorite hobbies. Let's see. Carving pumpkins. I think you picked up a question about that, which we might get to later. But I really enjoy carving pumpkins. I stand Canadians in the NFL and argue on the internet. Definitely has other hobbies as well. So,
All right. So before we move any further, I do want to again shout out our sponsor, Manscaped, and once again use the promo code PRESS PRESS, all capital. Get 20% off and free shipping on your next Manscaped order. I know that Manscaped graciously gave all of us here going for two sample pack. Includes the Lawnmower 3.0. I made this comment last week. I might stick to it, but I've worked at golf course maintenance for 10 years here in Northern Ontario. Seen a lot of lawnmowers. This is the best lawnmower ever. So definitely get the Lawnmower 3.0. Obviously for different purposes, but waterproof electric trimmer. Use in the shower. Very versatile, and obviously you want to separate face and other parts of your body, but I guess the NFL draft is done, so we're still gonna make this joke. He's still the first overall pick, but Trevor Lawrence, if you've got, he's got that type of hair, he can make it work. But if you've got that type of hair, especially in your pants, you probably really should get the Manscaped order. So again, use the promo code PRESS, 20% off. And razors are great. Obviously, trimming equipment's great. Deodorants and all those types of things, but also clothing, shirts. Also, going for two shirts, you can also get as well as a separate thing, separate promo inside the promoception, I suppose. But also, Manscaped is one of the best boxer briefs I've ever had. One of the most comfortable I've ever had, probably the most comfortable actually. So definitely great. It makes your package feel like a special package. So once again, promo code PRESS on your next Manscaped order. Don't be a cheapskate with your manhood. Use Manscaped. And so we'll keep going. Thanks for sticking there, Dan.
Sorry, I'm 12 sometimes. We're all 12 somewhere, right? So
yeah. Again, youthful energy and joy, right? That's we're trying to bring happiness. So maybe this could be also something happy, but what's something that the fantasy community as a whole doesn't know about you that you'd like to share with us?
I think I'm pretty open about things. I mean, like as far as like the fantasy, like it's interesting because I'm different people to different communities, right? So like I'm somebody to the art community and the data science community. That's kind of one community I'm like pretty active in. Another community is the rowing community. So really just being like a different person in those communities and kind of being finding my niche in those is kind of I'm a part of like multiple communities, right? So it's kind of interesting to like balance what people know about me in different ones. Um, what's one thing that nobody in the fantasy community knows about me? Oh, I've been fasting for the past, like I've been intermittent fasting for quite some time now. I'm actually in the middle of a 36-hour fast. So kind of 36 hours on, 1 hour off, and I've been doing that for a little while now. For a few months in the pandemic, trying to get back into like things before I lost before the pandemic. But I am a big believer in kind of keto and fasting, intermittent, and otherwise extended as well.
Actually, one thing I'd like to know personally, it just you've talked about how long you've been, well, at least enjoying football and how long you've been playing fantasy football. How many years in a row have you been doing rowing?
At least seven, seven. Geez, seven. Yeah, quite a long time now, since like 2014. Yeah, since 2014, I think is the first year. So this
I
is
mean,
like 6 or 7.
but you're speaking, community sense. It seems like you've been part of a lot of different communities for quite a while. So that's definitely that a good sense of connectedness. And again, especially for us, we're connecting with people not in our country a lot of times. So that sort of the worldwide internet connection is great for that.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, kind of balancing a bunch of different community connections because um, one of the people I like really look up to mentor wise kind of talks about this idea as local versus global, where you can like some people are naturally oriented to be like in their local communities, like they're the people that like you meet like organize their friend groups that they know in person. And there's other people who are very global oriented, where like their friends are on the internet. They pick out their ideas and they kind of like connect to those people and like really try to build that relationships. And I kind of go back and forth, and I'm with this on different people, like different ways, right? Like fantasy football is a very online community. It's a very global community. Like we're like I'm trying to be public with that. Rowing is a very like local community. Like I know people know that I row, but like I don't talk about it around here. I definitely like rowing is definitely a thing that I kind of keep with like my local friends. Like like it's kind of something I picked up here. You obviously have to physically row. You can't like do it on the internet. Um, so that's kind of like it's a different kind of relationship there. And just kind of balancing, going back and forth on it. I actually really like the balance of being able to like have friends both like in person when I want them and globally when I want them, and then otherwise, kind of maintaining some kind of introversion as well. So that's an interesting, just kind of like balancing all of those communities, if that makes sense. Like when you talk about those, I think it's just having like options like that. It really, I think they're important. And trying to like explore those and seeing kind of what fits you. Sometimes you don't know.
Well, speaking of important, what's one important revelation that you wish you'd gotten earlier in your life? Now that you've had it with some foresight behind that, but what's something you wish you had realized earlier?
You know, I thought about this, and I'm not really a huge believer in if I could go back type of life analysis. I like to believe that I make the best decision I can based on what I've learned and now based on what I know at the time. So I don't think it's fair to like evaluate myself in that sense because I know what I knew and I knew how I felt, and always try to make the decisions I can. So if I could talk to myself at the lowest points of my life, it'd honestly be more to forgive myself for things that out of my control, and to just tell myself to have faith and confidence that things will get better. Um, and really just thinking about like continuing to find the things that make me say hell yeah, or just say no to those things that don't. Whether it's like the things that like like the things that you say hell yeah to are like the things that like you start working on at 4 p.m. In my case, programming or whatever, and if you start working at 4 p.m. and you realize all of a sudden it's 4 a.m. Those are the things that you need to keep finding, like striving to find, and really to keep pushing for over time. Like it's the things that like time disappears. Like those are the things that like you really need to treasure. And honestly, just keep chasing those things. Make those things easier to find, easier to access. And it could be anywhere. It could be for anything. But really, just keep finding the hell yeahs, or trying to make the things that don't make you say that. Just say no, right? And being comfortable and confident to say that are the things that I tell myself to do. Um, whether I can live up to that, it's a little more tricky, but that's definitely sort of the life advice that I'd give myself if I could.
Perpetually seeking uh, perfect positivity. I almost had it anyway, but yeah, I think that good positive message there. Alliterations are awesome. I really tried to force that one, but see, I enjoyed making weird, awkward alliterations, so I will continue to do so.
I mean, it's if you can, it's you just like you try it, and you keep trying and you keep trying, and the few times you get it right, and as you get better at it, you'll get it more right often. But like just nailing the perfect pun, or nailing the perfect alliteration, or like the perfect joke, or the perfect dad joke, the one that like like the moment you say it, someone's going like I love those moments. And so like absolutely, if your alliteration's your thing, like just keep sticking at it, dude. It's gonna be awesome.
Perpetually. Yes.
Perpetually.
Now, what's a person, or who is one person that you would like to interview, or like to speak to? And this could be person all time, so dead or alive, any period, any point of time. Who would you like to have this conversation with?
I've had the pleasure of, and I kind of have a few names come to mind. So obviously, I'll talk about them. I'll talk about all of them because because I'm an interview guest. I'm going to take that liberty. But I've had the opportunity recently to ask Adam Harstad a lot of questions, and honestly, it's like just like there's so much wisdom about everything, like life advice and otherwise, and fantasy philosophy as well. Like we might disagree. Like I would disagree with him a little bit in some of the ways he analyzes players, but overall, just the way he thinks about like fantasy football, life, depression, ADHD, like some of the struggles I've had, he's been there. And so it's definitely one of those people that like I really look up to and really want to like continue to like include us in like a mentorship circle, kind of like continue to have his thoughts influence my life. But I've had was on AMA, like was part of an AMA and got to ask him a bunch of questions. And he's definitely like someone I definitely want to interview again if I could. And the other person is Derek Sivers. So I talked a little bit about Hell Yeah or No, and his kind of pop philosophy. In that sense, he's really good person to. He's still alive. He's based in I think New Zealand now. But he's one of those people where if you don't know what your like lot in life is, and like you really want to like sort of figure yourself out kind of thing, his work and his writing and his blog are all really awesome resources for that stuff, where like you talk about the life advice kind of guys. That's another person that I'd really love to interview, just to kind of pick his brain about like everything. Like he programs his own stuff, he's done it all, he was a musician, all that sort of stuff. And I think he's an awesome person that I'd love to interview more if I can.
Awesome. Yeah. Again, surround yourself. You were talking, surround yourself with great things, like things you enjoy doing. Also, surround yourself with great people, and that could mean, as you mentioned, physically surrounding, but also, who you're interacting with in any form, online or not. So, yeah, awesome.
Exactly.
Great there. So, Tan, we're going to move over to the fantasy side again. I guess we did quite a bit at the start of the episode, maybe a little more than we're accustomed to here. You can't blame us, though.
Of course, no. It's we're all connected on fantasy football, so it's very natural for sure.
All right, so let's start. What are your thoughts on zero RB?
Zero RB. So it's a form of structural drafting. And I like structural drafting as a whole because it not just like forces you to evaluate players, but instead of just evaluating players, you kind of approach a strategy with the idea of being in a better position to make decisions, and like you're usually balancing your structure so that either like A, like takes advantage of the current market, or B, um, it's contrarian. Like people aren't doing this, so there's an advantage to those. So there's a lot of like really well-known structural patterns, whether it's zero RB or zero receiver, which we call hyperfragile, I think these days, or avoiding the RB death zone, as Ben Gretsch put together a little while ago. And so like having this kind of pattern really helps make better decisions because you're tuning to the way like the overall player market is. You're not like sitting at each draft pick thinking about, is it Evans or Beckham or Watkins or whatever that's the right play here. It's okay, I want a receiver here. It doesn't really matter which one, but in order my preference is this. So it kind of makes those decisions easier. Zero RB specifically, I think it's faded a bit. I was into zero RB at one point. Had shifted to robust RB in terms of going like three running backs to avoid the death zone. And honestly, I think it's a function of the way it's both a function of the player strengths in the NFL. We just had like 4 straight good running back classes and a few like poorer receiver classes, if you will. And before that, it was like no running backs and all receivers. So partially it's a cyclical thing. And I think zero RB is going to come back as a very dominant strategy in the very near future. And it's already dominant, right? Like we talk about Scott Fishbowl. Last year's Scott Fishbowl, I'll call him the winner, even though he's not the winner. He went like he led the entire Scott Fishbowl through the entire regular season, which I think is actually a more difficult accomplishment. But Anthony Amico, who was just on an AMA I was just listening to, did a zero RB strategy for that league and like led the whole way, right? Like it's not like that's a bad strategy these days. It's just it's less popular and it's less dominant overall. Like he kind of nailed the contrarian part and like really nailed his quarterbacks, but as a pattern, I think it's going to come back very shortly. We're seeing kind of the running back class age out a bit, so you're starting to get those values. You're starting to get like a stronger receiving group again. This is a good year of receivers. Last year was a good year of receivers. So as those receivers kind of become dominant, I think there's an opportunity for the zero RB group to be a dominant strategy again. You hear about modified zero RB, basically running back, then hammer receivers or what have you. I'm still a big fan of like patterns like that and just try to identify what the pattern is for a specific league, competition, or whatever. I still think that's probably I still think that's a better idea than kind of coming at it from a player, like I want this player at this turn, this player at this turn, and really like anchoring on those. I'm less about the player evals. I'm like they're obviously important, but also in terms of like planning your strategy structurally, I think really better.
And I mean, you talked about auctions earlier. I think though, anytime where like you have to have actual specific dollar values on player, that's when you really want to get into the specifics of what players you have in tiers and price points, and really get to the individual. Like the ranking then really becomes more important when you're, drafting, snake draft or any type of startup style like that. Tiers are more important, and I think that helps with those. So you're talking about the RB death zone here, and strategies built around certain tier areas or certain ADP areas. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
those are really good detailed explanation of zero RB. So yeah, thank you for
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Now, do you have talk about different league formats? Do you have a preference for league format?
Um, I won't join anything except dynasties at this point. Just because I think there's just so many more ways to compete. Obviously there's best ball, but I feel like best ball is like a very like best ball redraft is a very like you draft once and you're kind of done with it kind of thing. And you're really everyone's optimizing for the same thing. Whereas in Dynasty it's a longer term game. I don't really have to like expound more on Dynasty. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Head-to-head best ball is something I definitely recommend right now in terms of Dynasty like scoring structure. So just getting rid of lineups. You still do the head-to-head matchups, but your lineup's the best of your lineups. Superflex and quarterback. So let's say like quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, superflex, and then like 5 flexes. So a very flexible lineup. Tight end premium. 6-point touchdown, 6-point passing touchdowns, -4 for interceptions, like the Scott Fish Bowl last year. So completion points for completion, minus points for attempt, points for first down, etc. So kind of the modern standard, if you will, in my mind. That's sort of what that looks like. Um, Startup auction, if we're feeling up for that. Um, and yeah, that's roughly the like sketching out kind of the league format that I would join. I know people kind of ask me about joining leagues all the time, and that's sort of what I'm looking for right now. I'm not really looking to add to my portfolio of leagues, but that's sort of what I would be looking for.
So you answer the next question, talk about scoring settings there. So I just want to dive into that a little quicker with auctions. Now, specifically, do you do any contract and salary leagues with auctions, or are they simply startup auction and once the auction's done, those money values are gone, and what happens with the rookie picks? I know some people also talk about rookie auctions as well. So, what have your experience has been in those settings, and what's your ultimate preference? I guess.
Yeah, I'm in one IDP salary cap league. It's not a rookie auction. It's a rookie draft. Or this it started with a startup auction, and then IDP salary cap from there, and it definitely adds a huge layer. And you kind of, and again, like the more you get into these sorts of things, you really want to be programming competent or Excel sheet competent. Um, you know the main twist behind that league is it's called 4-8, and basically the idea initially had been to like round up 4 different people to make a co-ownership experiment. And so there's 12 teams, each owned by 4 people, and you have to like agree on the decision. It's since faded, so now Joe Sidlowski is the other half of Dynasty Process, kind of my friend who used to help me get into Shiny and art programming. We kind of run that league together now, along with another friend named Pat. And that one's really interesting. I think having a league with that kind of contract and foresight value, it kind of almost throws out a lot of your like standard value trades, because your contract really dictates like certain amount of value as well. A really low contract on a rookie or something, or like a really low contract is worth a lot more, even if they're not producing as much. So it's really hard sometimes to get trades. I find that there are less trades in that league just because it's stickier to move a player. Everyone's kind of near the maximum. We haven't really all figured it out. It's only like a 2 or 3 year old league where we haven't all figured out how to do that yet. So in that sense, I don't think that I really appreciate working with Joe on it. It's kind of fun for us to have a league that bounced back and forth as our partnership. But honestly, like I'm a little less in on the salary cap idea now that I've done one. I might change my mind down the line, but right now it's kind of I find it less trade active, less waiver wire active a little bit. So there's a lot of long-term planning, but overall it's a little less. I'm a little less into that. I'm also in John Bosch's Fog of War League, so that one just finished up rookie auctions, or it's in the process of finishing up rookie auctions, I should say, where that league is exactly what you're thinking of in terms of being really sharp with your valuations, because instead of being being an auction where everyone knows the prices, it operates entirely 100% through blind bid waivers. So you don't know what the price of a rookie is going to be. You put like this, it's a 70 team league with 5 copies. So you put your pricing in, like you do your math, like who owns what, how much money is out there, how many people have this much money. And you plot like, okay, so Trevor Lawrence is on the board today. There's this much money on the board. I have to put in a bid for this player and see if I get him. And I don't know whether I'm getting him until like all the waivers run at midnight, and then you get this player. And it's a crazy league for valuation. I'm wrong as often as I am right about whether I'm going to get a player or how much it's going to be. But I need to evaluate not just what I think the player is worth, but also what the other people are going to bid on him, because you have no idea. and you're always jockeying for position with money. You know, like that extra dollar sometimes makes a difference. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you're off by like 300. Sometimes there are people in that league like John who will bid like $600 on Kyle Pitts, and the next highest copy goes for like 250. So like some people like John doesn't regret that one bit. He's like, I need Pitts. I have 101 in Superflex leagues. He actually does. Like if you're listening to this and ask John about it, he's like, yeah, I'm this high on Kyle Pitts, which is crazy, but everybody like 70 people, right? Like 70 different strategies, 70 different valuation schemes, 70 different bidding patterns. So I was lucky. I had a pretty good rookie pool. I came away with like Fields and Lance and Waddle and Bateman and Elijah Moore, and that was my haul. And it came out really well. And I think that having experience both with this format, with auctions, but also with valuations and like running trade calculator values and having that programming experience really put me at an edge to like have a sense of like what to bid and whether I would win it or not. And more often than not, I'm like, okay, so I'm willing to win it at this price. And it turned out to be pretty close to what I expected the market to be. Or I don't want this player, but I think he's going to go for this. And kind of looking back at it, yeah, it's within the range of like the minimum bid or the median bid or whatever. So those turned out pretty well. And I think that's a format where valuations more than rookie auctions. Sometimes in rookie auctions you're bidding up against each other. Sometimes you're playing the game, or like like you price enforce. There's no price enforcing in Fog because you're going to own that player if you don't, right? So you got to be really careful with that. But
Fog of War, I get it, right? Because you can't actually see what the amounts are. So
yeah, exactly. It's a well-named league for sure.
I think fantasy football is a little more fun than war, though. Definitely. But let's talk about some good happy moments. So, fantasy-wise, who is your all-time quarterback one, running back one, wide receiver one, and tight end one?
Yeah, we already know my quarterback one. That's Michael Vick. And honestly, like the sheer amount of joy, just having him go off in someone's face, it's just so satisfying. And honestly, like I kind of like look at these like, it could be LaDainian Tomlinson, it could be like the guys who like everybody knew was gonna like take it from the pole position and on. But I think like for me, it's also all-time fantasy value. Like picking like Vic, I picked up off waivers in week 6 or something. And like my running back one is like Arian Foster, who like again undrafted, like dominated like top 5, top 3, like perpetually against the grain. Similarly, as a fantasy player, Tyreek Hill, kick returner who's become the NFL's best receiver, like on the most dominant offense. Darren Waller, I'm also kind of in that same group. I actually picked up Jimmy Graham as well. I actually ended up having pretty good luck with waiver tight ends. I've had Jimmy Graham in the past, like as a New Orleans like undrafted guy. Darren Waller, Robert Tonyan, Logan Thomas last year. I'm a big fan of that type. Waller's I think my favorite just in terms of being right and being there. Like I was lucky with Jimmy Graham, but I was like I'm pretty like I'll own being up on like Darren Waller like before that even happened. So those are my 4 kind of like highest value all time to me. Kind of that like undrafted free agent late round sleeper guys who became superstars.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to rank them in that sense. So yeah, funny. Arian Foster, my first ever fantasy football draft pick ever was Arian Foster. So I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, he can't like obviously he's only ever undrafted once, but I did manage to pick him up before he became a thing, and then after he became a thing, it's like okay, so he's like top 5 until he's not, right?
Yeah,
but
no, but sure
being
that I
there
guess
for that like ascension is really the cool part.
Yeah, definitely for sure. No, good call there. I know the Darren Waller year. I'll pat myself on the back. I was not quite Darren Waller impact, but I think Mark Andrews is probably my most rostered player. So I was definitely on that train, and I felt, I was pretty confident. Like, this seems like a great depth chart to be on. He should get it. You get the best quality targets from a quarterback that seems to like to throw over the middle. So I was all in on Andrews, and it worked then. John Smith last year, he had some good weeks, not so much, but.
Yeah.
We'll talk. We'll get past that. I'll talk about something I really like. Last portion of the episode called high fives. I don't really do that every episode. I don't know why, but
I'll give it to
top five in five different categories. So we'll
Okay.
start with top five artists or bands.
Top five artists or bands. Linkin Park, The Weeknd, One Republic, Ripe, and let's go with like Home Free.
Right, that's a new one. You care to describe them to anyone who doesn't quite know them?
Yeah, I picked them up off of an underrated albums list, and it turned out to be like I just listened to that whole album like on like repeat in like 2018. It's a relatively new group, um, but it's kind of like poppy and like upbeat kind of pop, um, and very much that kind of like if you like pop, you'll like them. And it's kind of like a little bit Latin flavored sometimes. And yeah, it's hard to describe. I'm not very into music, but I pick up a few bands every now and then.
Well, I know you. So for the next top five, I've already mentioned one, so maybe this is more your wheelhouse. But top five books.
Top five books, yeah. I talked about Show Your Work and the rest of the Steal Like an Artist series. That's by Austin Kleon. Highly recommend. I'll count that as one book because I don't pick Show Your Work as my favorite of the lot. Hell Yeah or No comes from Derek Sivers, like I was saying. That's a book that's relatively new. It's totally worth reading. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. I'm big into that life advice kind of things. If you haven't already been aware of or kind of picked up over the course of this pod. Harry Potter kind of has to fit into every top five books for me. And I'll say deciding. The Naruto manga, I think I'll round up my top five. Ninjas.
All right. Well, okay. Well, now I know your top, also your top five, your favorite anime, likely as well. Probably not.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
All right.
I didn't. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, feel free.
It's okay. I actually don't watch a ton of anime. I kind of picked up the manga first, but kind of definitely then like okay, so watched it after the manga, and it's like everybody's like read the book first, then you don't like the manga as much or the anime as much, and the same thing with like Harry Potter. Right? Like the books were so much better, and it's unreal. But you take what you can get.
I mean, when something's created, whatever that original medium is created, and that's its full intent, right? So the art, the artist ultimate, that's what they wanted to package, and everything else comes from it. Not necessarily it's less pure, but not from that same point of view intention. Actually, curious to your point of view on this. So, Harry Potter, which house would you belong to?
I've done every like every time I do it, I get a different house. Like in terms of like I've done the quiz, and especially when I was younger, I loved Harry Potter. Today, probably like you think Ravenclaw, but I'm actually not like personality wise. That's not really me. I'd probably be closer to like Gryffindor or Slytherin, like one of those two, or like a little bit more like outgoing, a little less helpful. That's sort of where I like figure out like the loyalty kind of thing. Despite me being helpful on the internet all the time, that's sort of like I sort of regard myself that way. But obviously, like it depends on which aspects of me you're looking at. So, um, yeah, Slytherin, ambitious, something like that. I don't know. I can be like that sometimes, I guess, but it's hard to say, right? And it sort of like depends on the mood at any given moment.
Well, it speaks to volumes that you talk about, fitting into different communities, and you could, with if you were at Hogwarts, you'd fit into different houses. So,
Yeah, exactly. It depends on right. Like I'm a certain way with certain people with certain communities, so I would be different if I was in each house. So that's a good point as far as like being chameleon like.
Oh, that would be a cool power too if you know that spell, the chameleon
Yeah,
spell.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're already talking Harry Potter. I wonder if this will come up as well on this list. Well, although maybe not because it's originally a book. So, but top 5 movies.
Yeah, I'm actually not huge on movies. I actually have some struggles keeping my brain engaged. Some recent highlights I've enjoyed. Shawshank Redemption I saw recently. I really enjoyed that. That's kind of a classic. Um, I'll I'll call these movies, even though they're not really. Sherlock episodes on Netflix.
Yeah.
They're like 2 hours long. They have to be movies, right? Except there's like six of them, and they're more TV than. Anyways, I don't know. Anyways, it's fun.
Each
Um,
season, each season is 3 movies.
right.
The-
It's a lot. It's
yeah.
their movies, right? Marvel kind of as a whole, I think my favorite Marvel character is Captain America. Um, Ender's Game I saw for the first time. I saw before I read the book. The book was better, but I actually did enjoy the movies as well, surprisingly. Um, and The Martian kind of come up in that. Again, a book as well as a movie. I saw the movie first, so I don't hate it as much as others. But those kind of come up with the first five I would think about.
All right. Awesome. So we'll see what the Canadian traditions are for this, but top 5 game day foods.
Top five game day foods. Tater tots, spring rolls. That's more the Asian in me. Chicken fingers, ribs, and poutine. Got to stick the Canadian in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, and I remember. Well, actually, I remember visiting Ottawa one time. One summer they had a Poutine festival, and so that was they took all Bank Street and carts of all along the street, like for I almost said miles, thinking that's too American for but
Kilometers,
definitely
yeah.
definitely a couple kilometers. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was that was definitely impressive to see how big that festival was, and that was just that was just one festival in Ottawa. So I think it's definitely a good center for a lot of different types of events like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Ribfest is always pretty good here. I mean, Ribfest is the same apparently everywhere, but I only see it here. So, I haven't been to Texas. I haven't been to the States and really like taken part of that. And hopefully you'll get to soon. But, uh, you know, I enjoy like a good ribs on game day, like everybody else does, I'm sure. So,
Yummy. I'll take them even if there's no game.
yeah, yeah,
although
for sure.
although watching so many sports, there's always a game on at some point.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Definitely top 5, right? And for our final of these, before we get to the top 5 list, so you hinted at it already. So talking about pumpkin carvings. So why don't you inform the viewers and listeners a little bit about what pumpkin carvings are?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably familiar with it in terms of jack-o'-lanterns and Halloween. And I kind of like taking it a little bit further than that because I kind of one year got into like carving art on it and skin carving. And you can actually check out like a gallery of the pumpkins I've carved over the years, tanho.ca/pumpkins. And basically, I've taken like over the years, I've done one or two a year. Last year was the pandemic. I did five, just kind of one a week for every week in October. But basically, I kind of take like just random things that have kind of inspired me artistically or over the course of the year, and carve them out. And kind of in some element of detail, I use a lino cutter. So kind of remember if you like the rubber stamp carving tools from your high school days. That's the same tools. I actually don't nick myself that often. People ask me that a lot. Like, have you lost any fingers? I have not. I don't understand how it's possible, but I mean, I understand how it's possible. I haven't done it, and I don't see it as that being like that much of a danger. But I may be doing it differently. So, it's relatively safe, and it can end up being pretty detailed, carving out stuff. You're about to ask top 5 pumpkin carvings, right? That's sort of where you're
Yeah,
going to go with this.
exactly. So, I was going to leave this up to, it could be ones that you've made or just overall, anything you've seen. So, I'll free reign on that.
Yeah, I'll pick from the ones I've made, and I think I picked mostly like just kind of like how I feel they turned out. I think my top 5 favorite are the euchre hand, the tractor, there's an ORC rowing oar where I carved the logo onto the pumpkin, an oar onto the pumpkin, and then carved the logo into that. Last year I made a pretty cool masked Darth Vader, and kind of the very first artistic pumpkin carving. I made with my sister many years ago now, and it was a How to Train Your Dragon carving with Hiccup having a flaming sword. It was pretty awesome. I still have very fond memories of that one. So that's what got me into it, and I still kind of counted my top 5 to this day.
It's a little bit like Michael Vick, right? Like that first massive waiver pickup that really crushes that next week. That you always remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I still think it's I still look forward to it every year. And I always think like I'm gonna be short on inspiration, and something always turns up that like I really want to do. Last year, one of the things that kind of came up, like I didn't really think that this was gonna be a thing, but I carved Black Panther after Chadwick Boseman passed away, and after all the stuff that had happened in the U.S. with Black Lives Matter, and I thought it was really fitting. It kind of made like it was. I definitely was like reflecting on how the year had gone, especially in that sense, and obviously with masked Darth Vader as well. But just kind of, it's a nice time for me to like reflect on how the year's gone. Kind of October's kind of like 3/4 of the year so far, so kind of like really thinking about those things and really enjoy it. I think it's a nice meditative process, turns out, and makes some nice memories later because it lights up really well usually.
Well, I think we made some really nice memories here. I mean, this is, it's live, of course, also being recorded on podcast form. So definitely appreciate everyone who tuned in, anyone who's listening. So Tan, would you like to send any final messages to everyone?
Yeah, that was an absolute pleasure. Always happy to come on to these things and happy to get the chance to talk to you. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at _Tanho. I do a live stream on Twitch for mostly programming. You can follow that at twitch.tv/Tanho_. It's backwards of Twitter. And otherwise, always happy to reach out. If you're using my tools, using my R packages, wanting to access fantasy football data, I'm pretty active on Twitter. I answer lots of questions. My DMs are open. So always happy to connect.
Yeah, happy to have you on. And again, we're always here on Going for Two live, programming almost every day of the week. I know I will also be joining the Dynasty Gambit. I know if anyone who's tuned in regularly, I've gone on for a couple episodes to guest, but Hamid and Dr. Jim Ferretti have graciously allowed me to join permanently. So that'll be this Thursday. Will be my first episode as co-host. So really looking forward to that. I'll be here every 2 weeks. We've got actually another Canadian coming up 2 weeks from now, JD from the Goat District. So again, keeping the Canadian content consistent. There you go. Good alliteration. So thank you, Tan, very much for joining. And thank you everyone who follows along. I'm at Senra Says on Twitter. And I already mentioned the shirts, goingfor2.com/store. And really just go to goingfor2.com. All sorts of great content, especially for DFS. I know, regularly, not baseball fans, but if you do like baseball DFS, I'm retweeting the Going for Two articles whenever I can. So definitely check that out. And everything for Going for Two is at Going for Two on Twitter. And again, use the full press coverage, or use the code PRESS from the Press Coverage Show, and you get 20% off free shipping on your next order from Manscaped. So again, Tan, man, it was really great talking to you. Manscaped providing us. But yes, appreciate it very much.
Take care.
All right.